very warm thank you for organizing this and giving me an opportunity to speak this afternoon on a set of topics that I think are very, very important, not just for India, but for the world as well. And I am very glad that we are having these discussions and deliberations. And when you invited me for this, I was very happy to join because we need a lot of these discussions as competition law evolves and unfolds in India. Now, before I start with my specific remarks regarding competition law, I want to take a step back and tell you why it's so important for us at this stage. And in fact, this was the reason why our standing committee with many, many honorable members, including the former finance minister, Shri Chidambaramji, who has got very deep experience in the economy as well, were all unanimously of the view that looking at competition and looking at particularly digital competition was very important and relevant for us at the standing committee. India, as you know today, is a $3.3 trillion economy and one of the largest, if not the largest, digital ecosystem in the world, certainly from a market economy perspective. But more importantly, our economy is growing very strongly. Today, it's the shining star of the global economy, and we are headed towards being a $5 trillion economy quite soon, 26, 27, 28, somewhere in this time frame. We will be not just a $5 trillion economy, we will be the world's third largest economy. And you can consider, how you would want to categorize China. But I think after the US, very soon we will be the world's second largest open market economy. So that's where India is headed over the next few years. And as a result, the way in which competition happens in India, the way in which we regulate competition, the manner in which our digital ecosystem develops, all of these are of great importance, not just for India and for our economic growth. They also have tremendous precedent-setting impact around the world as well. And here I just want to speak for a minute about our digital ecosystem. In a $5 trillion economy, it's quite possible, depending on how you, again, classify it, that our digital ecosystem will be $1 trillion digital economy. In that, we will have probably, the largest number of internet users on an open, free system. Now, of course, we know China has more, but China has a system that is very firewalled and very restricted in terms of its linkages to the external world. Whereas India's digital economy is extremely interconnected and linked in with the outside world as well. And we have all the world's most important and largest tech companies operating here. And at the same time, we have many companies in India that are also very, very large and very successful globally. And that's certainly on the services side, but increasingly that's becoming much, much more possible as well on the product side or on the software as a service side. So we have a very influential, very important $1 trillion digital economy. And therefore, as our economy grows and evolves, the manner in which we regulate competition, we evaluate competition, we address competitive gaps, will be extremely important for the world also, particularly as far as the digital economy is concerned. With that in mind, over the last few years, and this is a continuous process that has gone on ever since Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji's government came to power in 2014, we have been looking at how we can strengthen and improve our competition law framework. And that has been an ongoing process through various judgments of the Competition Commission of India, NCLAT, and the Supreme Court. There has been a lot of case law and refinement to our thinking around competition law. But also, there has been a very long process, I think it's probably 5 or 6 years, Jyoti ji will know better, during which we have examined the competition law as it exists right now and thought about what kinds of amendments we should bring for that. And so the Competition Amendment Bill, which was tabled, and then our standing committee worked on it extensively, and that's now been reintroduced in Parliament, that Competition Amendment Bill is going to play a very, very important role in strengthening our competition law framework from an ex post perspective, after, let's say, anti-competitive practices have happened. Along with that, with the introduction of our report on digital competition, the establishment of the Digital Competition Committee, and hopefully quite soon a digital competition bill, which I have also provided my inputs as a private member bill. Once we bring in the digital competition bill as well, and hopefully the Digital Competition Act, we will establish a very comprehensive framework for competition law, which includes both ex-ante provisions, and that's for digital markets, and then ex-post provisions for more traditional markets. And that overall competition law framework for our economy, soon to be $5 trillion, $10 trillion economy, our hope is enable us to have the world's leading competition law framework. So everything we do in India on Honorable Shri Narendra Modi ji's guidance and leadership is not just to be world class, but to be world leading. And we should be world leading if we are going to have the world's second largest open market economy. So that's the spirit, that's the philosophy behind the amendments to what we're doing on the competition amendment bill, and then the work we are now starting on the digital competition side. That's the backdrop. That's the thinking behind all of this. So I wanted to give you that background so you understand how important this is, both from an economy perspective as well as from a digital markets perspective. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you some of the details on the competition amendment bill, which is the ex-post framework, some of the very important aspects that have come in there. And then I want to tell you a little bit about the digital competition bill as we have thought about it in terms of the standing committee report, as well as from the perspective of the private member bill that I've introduced as an input to the government's deliberations on that. So I'll spend a few minutes on that, and then I'll conclude. And Pradeep ji, if you think it's appropriate, certainly, I'll be happy to take questions or any inputs that others may have. But let me therefore turn to the first part of this, which is the competition amendment bill. Now, the competition bill itself was drafted, put together, and brought in by about 2004, 2005, was notified and in operation by about 2007. So that's the timeline, the way I understand it. But in those 15 years, since 2007, while the case law has evolved through the Competition Commission of India judgments and Supreme Court and other judicial judgments, there has been no amendment to the law itself. So the law has remained as it was. Now, with this set of amendments that have come in, we have very substantially strengthened and improved the competition bill. And this set of changes, I think, is going to have a very, very positive and significant impact on the way competition law is practiced and competition regulation is done in India. There are 3 or 4 important aspects to this competition amendment bill, which I'd like to draw your attention to. Number one, because of the evolution of particularly digital markets, it was necessary to introduce another criteria for examining mergers and acquisitions, which was a value threshold that didn't exist earlier. So that value threshold has been introduced, 2,000 crores, right, Jyotaji? Is the 2,000 crores is the value threshold, because you can have few assets, you can have limited turnover, but if you're a very valuable company with extensive intellectual property and a fast evolving position in the market, you can be worth a lot. And therefore, there's a value threshold, which is that if there's a mergers and acquisition that happens, and if it crosses the value threshold of 2,000 crores, it will be considered by the Competition Commission of India, which creates predictability in the marketplace as well. So if your deal crosses that 2,000 crore threshold, you know that it's going to be examined on a prima facie basis by the Competition Commission of India. So that's one very important change that has happened, which is the value criteria for considering mergers and acquisitions. The second very, very important, and to my mind, the flagship amendment in this competition amendment bill is the settlement provision. And the settlement provision is very, and commitment provisions, because these are very important. And I want to spend a minute or two explaining to you why they will very much strengthen our competition law framework and also really contribute dramatically to ease of doing business. So suppose, for example, that the CCI establishes that there has been some violation of competitive behavior, there have been certain anti-competitive practices and so on. They can, of course, start their investigation, and during the process of investigation, if it is possible to come to either a commitment or a settlement, commitment which are remedies and settlements, which are actual financial payments as well, because there has been some loss and damage that can be computed. But remedies in terms of competitive behavior, settlement in terms of actual financial penalties, both of these can be negotiated and established while the investigative process is going on, before a judgment is given and before the judgment is appealed. Now, as of now, there is a very lengthy process by which matters are settled. So the CCI gives its judgment, it's appealed to the NCLAT, then it's appealed to the Supreme Court. And so what happens is that there can be cases, there can be significant issues as far as competitive conduct is concerned that does not get settled for years and years and years. Now, that impairs competition in India and does not provide remedies to litigants that are affected, and therefore is quite suboptimal. And therefore, if indeed there is a strong set of evidence and there is clarity that anti-competitive practices have happened, either commitment in terms of actual changes in behavior and remedies can be implemented, settlement can be imposed, and this can all be negotiated and settled without having to go through this long and lengthy appeal process. And there's a very important provision in the Competition Amendment Bill which says that if a commitment happens or if a settlement happens, no further appeals are possible. This is very important. So if the parties sit across the table, that they establish some kind of closure to the case through negotiation, they can't appeal this further. So something that may have taken 5 years or longer to get closed out could actually get closed within months now, because the parties can sit across the table, they can demonstrate that there's significant evidence of anti-competitive behavior or anti-competitive conduct, and then agree on remedies, and then those remedies can be established, and that's the end of the process, and we get closure to that. That, from an ease of doing business perspective and making the economy more efficient, is extraordinarily important. It is a provision that exists in all the other major jurisdictions in the world. In India, we did not have that, and therefore I think bringing that in is a very, very, very important and very positive change that is going to come into our competition law. Maybe Jyotiji and others may have further elaborations on this, but for me, this is the flagship set of changes that have been brought in through the bill this time. So that's the number 2 and most important set of amendments. Number 3, there's a whole series of them, including how the Competition Commission of India is going to operate, the speed at which certain decisions have to be taken. So there are a number of changes on ease of doing business in this Competition Amendment Bill that are also quite important, and you may want to see that as practitioners, but those are also quite salutary, they are also quite positive, and we have welcomed those as well. So overall, as I said, after 15 years, a very important set of amendments have been made to the ex-post competition law framework. These are extremely, extremely positive for us. And we are very hopeful that, perhaps in this second half of the budget session, we will be able to get it passed unanimously, because the committee itself, our committee, which is a bipartisan committee, has extensively reviewed it already. So hopefully that will get passed and it will become law, and I think have a very positive impact on competition regulation in India. So that's the Competition Amendment Bill. Now, we have seen across the world how other jurisdictions, notably the EU with its Digital Markets Bill, the US with various bills that are in Congress right now, Japan, Korea, Germany, many other important jurisdictions have started to consider digital markets quite differently from traditional markets. Jyotiji touched on it, but let me just sharpen the point. The fact is that the economics of digital markets are fundamentally different from the economics of physical traditional markets. And that comes because of marginal costs being very, very low, virtually zero, and that results in increasing returns to scale, increasing returns to size, which is not the traditional way of thinking about competition, because of decreasing returns to size result in competitive outcomes and perfect competition. Now, with digital markets with zero marginal costs, you end up in a situation, because of network effects, obviously scale effects, learning effects, we end up in a situation where we're increasing returns to size rather than diminishing returns to size. You look at the microeconomics textbook, economics 101, everybody's taught diminishing outcomes. But what was established, and I was actually part of it in early on in my professional career back in the early 1990s, there was a tremendous rethinking of economics in digital markets with a recognition that they were subject to increasing returns to size, not diminishing returns to size. And as a result, we ended up not with perfect competition and competitive equilibria. We ended up with situations where we had winner take all markets with monopolistic outcomes. So very different understanding of how these markets behave. And if these markets behave like in this fashion, as Jyoti ji pointed out, because these increasing returns to scale move so quickly in terms of network effects, in terms of scale, and so on, you have outcomes that tip very, very quickly. And strategists, and I've been a strategist for many years as well, working in digital markets, strategists understand the nature of these economics very well. We know markets tip. So if you're sitting from a corporate perspective, you're doing everything possible to tip markets in your favor. That's your job as a corporate strategist. And there are any number of books. If you haven't read The Business of Platforms, please read it, which represents some of the most sophisticated thinking. There's some excellent thinking by Varian as well on digital markets. These are kind of the textbooks for strategists looking at how they can create winner take all outcomes. Because if you're looking at it from a shareholder perspective, you want a monopolistic outcome. And so that's how big tech players operate, because they understand that these are the market dynamics that they can take advantage of. They can engineer monopolistic outcomes that make them very, very wealthy and make their shareholders very wealthy. And this is empirically well demonstrated. There are any number of such examples. And every time there is a new sort of technology platform, whether it was, of course, first client server, then personal computers, then the internet, then mobile computing, now cloud computing, now AI-based cloud computing. Every time major technology platforms come up, vast new ecosystems, vast new market niches open up. And then, of course, everybody tries to engineer winner take all outcomes. They tip the market as quickly as possible. And then we end up with a series of monopolies in all of these different market niches. That's the way digital markets work. And they're all interconnected and interlinked. And everybody is, kind of playing six-dimensional chess across them. That's the way you look at it from a corporate strategist perspective. Now, if that's the perspective of a big tech company, we as regulators and policymakers have to be equally adept at trying to avoid these kinds of outcomes which are not in the national interest. So under those circumstances, what should the competition law framework look like? Should it continue to be an ex-post framework, or do we get much more nuanced and sophisticated about it and consider it from an ex-ante perspective to see how do we avoid not just winner-take-all monopolistic outcomes in one market, but in a chain of linked markets? For Microsoft, I can tell you back 20 years ago, the mantra at Microsoft was link, lock, leverage. Link, lock, leverage. That is the classic bundling tying approach, right? So I own an app store. Now you got to use my payments platform. You use my payments platform. Now you got to use my credit services. You use my credit services. Now I'm going to cross-sell insurance to you. That's link, lock, and leverage, right? So that's the way, strategists work. That's how they think. And so we have to be very sophisticated as regulators and policymakers in terms of how do we prevent this interlocking of markets? How do we prevent this bundling and tying so that we do not have a situation where we have a non-level playing field, and as a result of that, the same few players win every single market by tipping these markets in their favor, right? That's what we have to consider. Now, to that end, what we have done is we have considered, and again, this is based on what many other jurisdictions have done, as well as the actual case law and the cases that have come before the CCI, for example, the Google case that the CCI is considering right now. There are a series of anti-competitive practices that we have seen over and over again that include tying and bundling, as I talked about, anti-steering provisions, platform neutrality, predatory pricing, exclusivity arrangements, data usage. All of these are given in a tremendous amount of detail in our digital competition report that we brought to Parliament December 2022. If you have not seen it, I would very much urge you all to take a look at it, because we've extensively documented practices in India as well as other jurisdictions. So these are 10 anti-competitive practices that are actually quite well demonstrated in the digital marketplace right now. And therefore, the regulatory framework that we are recommending in this is as follows. What we are saying is that we first have to identify what we are calling, taking a leaf from the finance book, if you will, systemically important digital intermediaries. So in finance, we have this concept of systemically or systemically important financial institutions that are too big to fail effectively and have to be very closely regulated and supervised. That's a well-established precedent from financial regulation. Therefore, we are suggesting, and other jurisdictions that you have also suggested, we identify a small group of players who are important digital intermediaries that have very big sort of platforms that control several markets at once. And what we do is we then scrutinize them with a higher level of regulation and supervision on them for these 10 anti-competitive practices, and we try and prevent them from really using these so that smaller companies get a level playing field and are able to compete with them effectively in other markets as well. They have to file compliance reports to demonstrate, virtually how they are working in these different markets, and it's really a question of transparency that we're trying to create in this regard. And to conclude, therefore, that as we do this, as we try and have this kind of systemically important digital intermediary compliance, we ask them to give us details on how they are performing with respect to these anti-competitive practices. It's equally important, and Jyotiji touched on it as well, important that CCI be strengthened, that they have a much larger, much deeper, much more expert digital markets department that is looking at these compliance reports, is involved in the marketplace, is working with stakeholders, so that as companies become increasingly more sophisticated, more astute in terms of how they play the competitive game on their side, that our regulators are equally capable and equally effective in making sure that we have genuine high quality competition and a level playing field for all players, whether they be big or small. So even as we bring in the legal framework as policymakers, we are very cognizant that we have to build institutional capacity as well. We have to build institutional expertise as well, so that we can keep up with these very, very sophisticated, very well-funded big tech players also. So that's kind of the approach that we put together and recommended from the standing committee. And now, of course, the Digital Competition Committee is consulting with stakeholders as well and starting to decide how to draft a bill to be able to regulate digital markets also. So I'll conclude with just saying that, again, repeating, we have an economy that's heading towards 5 trillion. We'll have a digital economy that's 1 trillion. India is a world leader. It's an open market economy, and therefore it's extremely important for us to have a world-leading competition law framework. I am personally very satisfied and pleased that working together across the legislative branch and the executive branch of government, that we have been able to bring in, both from an ex-post perspective, a very robust and strong competition law framework, and now with an ex-ante framework also under discussion, that we will be bringing that as well, and that will position India very much at the vanguard of competition. Thank you.